Welcome back to Horror Facts EN, the place where we dig into the darkest sides of our world. There's a reason scientists refuse to talk about this publicly. In the quiet hours between late-night programming and the dawn, television static was once the void we stared into, a flickering gateway to the unknown. But what if that void stared back? What if, just once, the chaos resolved into a message, a warning so specific, so chillingly accurate, that it foretold a tragedy with impossible detail, only to vanish back into the ether, leaving behind nothing but questions and a profound, lingering dread? This is not the plot of a forgotten horror film. This is the true, unsolved mystery of the Max Headroom broadcast intrusion, a case that has baffled investigators, haunted broadcast engineers, and become a cornerstone of dark media folklore for over 3 decades. On the night of November 22, 1987, viewers of Chicago's WGN-TV and later WTTW were subjected to a bizarre, 90-second hijacking of their screens. A figure in a distorted Max Headroom mask ranted incoherently, while spliced imagery flashed with sinister intent. But buried within the glitch-art nightmare and unsettling laughter was a single, stark phrase that would later curdle the blood of anyone who remembered it, a seemingly nonsensical reference that predicted, with terrifying precision, a real-world aviation disaster that would claim the lives of 271 people. This is the story of the signal that knew too much, the disaster it foreshadowed, and the terrifying possibility that this was not just a prank, but a prophecy broadcast from the shadows. The evening of November 22, 1987, began like any other for Chicago television viewers. At 9:14 p.m., during a broadcast of Doctor Who on the WGN-TV station, the signal was violently severed. In its place, a jarring, flickering image appeared. A figure sat before a corrugated metal background, wearing a rubber mask of the then popular CGI personality, Max Headroom. But this mask was distorted, the smile a grotesque rictus. For 25 seconds, the intruder, whose voice was scrambled by an audio modulator, rambled in a surreal, choppy monologue. He mentioned clowns, Coca-Cola, and uttered the cryptic line, "Your love is fading." Then, as suddenly as it began, the broadcast returned to normal. The station was flooded with calls from confused and disturbed viewers. Engineers scrambled, assuming it was a sophisticated but isolated pirate broadcast. The true horror, however, was just on a delay. Roughly 2 hours later, at 11:15 p.m., during a PBS broadcast of the film Horror of Dracula on WTTW, the signal was hijacked again. This time, the intrusion lasted a full 90 seconds. The masked figure returned, now accompanied by a person spanking him with a flyswatter in a bizarre, ritualistic act. The audio was a cacophony of distorted music, canned laughter, and fragmented speech. He sang snippets of songs, cursed the station, and then, in a moment of eerie clarity, a phrase cut through the noise, "Catch the wave." He then held up a Pepsi can, before the transmission dissolved into screaming static and was lost. The hijacker was never caught. The equipment used was sophisticated, implying inside knowledge or significant resources. But the true terror of that night wasn't the bizarre spectacle itself. It was the ominous seed planted in those 2 simple words, a phrase that would soon find a horrifying real-world echo. In the immediate aftermath, "Catch the Wave" was parsed by investigators and amateur sleuths alike. Was it a reference to the Pepsi slogan, "Catch the Pepsi Wave"? A nonsensical boast from the hacker? It seemed like just another piece of the puzzle's absurdist clutter. But then, less than a year later, on December 21, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 departed London's Heathrow Airport, bound for New York. As it cruised at 31,000 feet over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, a bomb concealed in a cassette player detonated in the forward cargo hold. The Boeing 747, named Clipper Made of the Seas, was torn apart. All 259 people on board perished, along with 11 residents of Lockerbie, making a total of 270 victims. The disaster was a watershed moment in aviation security and international terrorism. And its connection to the broadcast intrusion? The flight number, Pan Am 1. And here's the most important part. 03, In the radio communications and aviation vernacular of the time, pilots and air traffic controllers would often use a phonetic alphabet. The number 103 is pronounced 103. But in a common, casual shorthand, it could be heard and said as 103. 103. Say it out loud. Now, listen to the audio from the WTTW hijacking again. Through the distortion, many listeners hear the hijacker not just say, "catch the wave," but a longer, garbled phrase that sounds unmistakably like, "catch the wave, 103." The coincidence is staggering. A bizarre, unsolved broadcast intrusion references a specific, obscure phrase, a flight number, nearly a year before that very flight is destroyed in one of history's most infamous terrorist attacks. Was this a sick, premeditated boast from someone with foreknowledge of the Lockerbie bombing? A chilling warning that went unheeded because it was wrapped in the guise of a surreal prank? Or is it the most horrifying coincidence in the history of media? The FBI and FCC launched investigations that ultimately went cold. The technical skill required was significant. The hijacker needed to overpower the broadcast signal of a major network from a mobile or fixed location with a powerful transmitter, likely within a 15-mile radius of the Sears Tower, which housed the broadcast antennas. This pointed to someone with engineering knowledge, a disgruntled broadcast employee, a rogue ham radio operator, or an electronic savant. The use of the Max Headroom character suggested a familiarity with cutting-edge 80s media and computer graphics. Yet, the seemingly juvenile and scatological nature of the broadcast, the flyswatter spanking, the stolen cartoons spliced into the feed, clashed with the sophistication of the crime. This duality has fueled endless speculation. Was it an inside job by a WGN technician with a grudge? A collective of university students with access to broadcast equipment? The most compelling and disturbing theory, however, ties the act to darker forces. Some researchers have posited a connection to emerging, underground pirate television groups testing boundaries. Others, looking at the Lockerbie connection, have dared to ask a more terrifying question: could the hijacker have been linked to the perpetrators of the bombing? Was this a cryptic calling card from a terrorist cell, embedding a clue in plain sight as a form of twisted bravado? The logistics make this seem far-fetched. Why risk exposure for a nonsensical prank? But the coincidence of 103 is a ghost that refuses to be exorcised. The figure behind the mask remains a silhouette, his motives buried under layers of static and speculation, his joke, or his warning, eternally unresolved. The Max Headroom incident did not exist in a vacuum. It was part of a small but frightening wave of broadcast intrusions in the 1980s, a time when analog signals were vulnerable to those with the know-how. Yet, none have achieved its legendary status. It persists because it operates on two terrifying levels. On one level, it is a classic creepypasta born in the analog age, a mysterious, laughing face interrupting your safe, scheduled programming, a violation of domestic sanctity that prefigured digital hacking anxieties. On a deeper, more unsettling level, it is a modern-era omen. The idea that a prophecy of mass death could be transmitted through the communal hearth of the television, disguised as noise, taps into a primordial fear of overlooked signs. In the decades since, every frame has been analyzed, every audio waveform scrubbed for clues. Enthusiasts have attempted to recreate the hijack with period technology. Documentaries have featured interviews with the original engineers, who still speak of that night with a mix of professional frustration and profound unease. The incident forced a rapid overhaul of broadcast security, effectively ending the era of such brazen signal piracy. But it left behind an indelible mark on our cultural psyche. It serves as a permanent reminder that our information streams are fragile, that the line between entertainment and horror is just a frequency shift away, and that sometimes, the most terrifying messages are the ones we cannot understand until it is far, far too late. So, what are we left with? A laughing mask in the void. A scrambled voice. A phrase that became a flight number, and a flight number that became a tombstone for 270 souls. The official record calls it an elaborate, unsolved prank. The coincidence of Lockerbie is just that, a coincidence, a trick of pareidolia where we hear patterns in chaos because the alternative is too horrifying to accept. But true horror often lives in that liminal space between accident and intent. Whether the hijacker was a tech-savvy vandal or something far more sinister, the broadcast achieved a kind of dark immortality. It stands as a ghost in the machine, a permanent glitch in our understanding of history, whispering the terrible question, what if the signal was trying to tell us something, and we were all just too busy changing the channel? The mystery remains, as static-filled and impenetrable as it was on that November night. If you found this dive into one of media's darkest puzzles compelling, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more explorations into the unexplained. Share your theories in the comments below. Was it a prophecy, a prank, or something else entirely? The signal is waiting.